Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Buti. You're very welcome. I just want to go back, if I may, to the 2008. And in your opening statement, you say that it's not for the Commission to judge whether ultimately the decision to issue the guarantee was a good one or not. But the Commission had to approve the guarantee for state aid purposes. So was that not a judgment being made by the Commission at the time?
I stand my written statement saying that it's not for us to judge this. We did not. I think there was a question in my previous hearing whether we have asked to do so and to implement. This was definitely not the case. The European Commission intervenes here in terms of the application of state aid. So it is up to DG Competition to implement the state aid rules, and from that viewpoint, I think the Commission adopted, and supported the decision. But this is a different thing compared to the, let's say, to the judgment on the, let's say, wisdom of having such a large.
You can approve something in terms of state aid rules, but you can remain neutral on the actual decision being made.
I think when I said that the state of affairs, the institutional setting and the legal setting at the time was not complete, it was not let's say, did not allow to have all to see all the bits and pieces together. This applies also to this particular case, and the guidelines on state aid, they were issued, afterwards by the Commission and by DG Competition.
Okay. What about the judgments you make when you say the guarantee was too generous and magnified the fiscal impact of the banking crisis? You say that in your opening statement. Is that not a view or a judgment from the Commission now?
You should read also the rest of my statement.
No, I have, and I'm going to go through it with you. Don't worry. Yeah.
Yes, I think with hindsight, I would say that the blanket guarantee was by covering essentially all liabilities was very large, too large. And when we came to the decisions later on, at the European level as a whole, then it was, I think, the liabilities covered were smaller than the blanket guarantee. At the same time, I have to say, and I repeat it because I try to apply this, let's say, I have this conceptual reflex on not being excessively harsh now with things that, with the knowledge of the time. I think I do not envy, I say it in my statement, those who had to make that decision at the time. It was in very, very difficult and dire circumstances.
But is that not the Commission making a judgment on the guarantee, that it was too generous? You say that in your statement. Are you not here as the Commission making that judgment?
No, what I'm saying is that with hindsight, it was indeed very generous, possibly too generous. At the same time, I acknowledge that those who had to make that judgment in those life-threatening conditions I think had possibly good justification for being very, very risk-averse. What we can see clearly is that the blanket guarantee intertwined the fate of the banking system and the fate of the public finances in a way which was a perverse one.
So you criticise the Irish government for not consulting with European partners. What do you mean by European partners? Because we know that the Irish government did consult with the ECB. So what do you mean by that?
I mean that to my knowledge, and I can speak for the Commission, we were not consulted, we were not informed, and we were told ex post.
Okay, but were you aware that the ECB had been consulted?
I'm not. I cannot say.
Okay, in terms of the Commission's involvement here, should the Commission not have been consulted? Do you feel that it should have been consulted beforehand, before the decision was made?
I think it would have been wise to do so, yes.
Okay. And in terms then of the Commission's responsibility here, because you say again in your opening statement that there were no specific guidelines in place in September, but there were then in October. So does responsibility fall on the Commission for those guidelines not being in place before the banking crisis in September? Again, given the context, the liquidity difficulties that banks were facing all over Europe through 2008, does the Commission accept responsibility for those guidelines not being in place?
No, I cannot answer here. I'm representing the Director General for Economic and Financial Affairs. This was a matter for the DG in charge of competition policy, so I cannot express myself on this.
Was your section slow in getting recommendations to the Director General for guidelines to be in place for the kind of crisis that we saw in September, which then came in October? Was there a delay in realising the seriousness of what was happening in the European banking system at the time?
I can only tell you in very general terms that we stood ready, as Commission as a whole, to react as quickly as we could in unprecedented circumstances and putting in place what was needed at the time. And this is the only thing I can tell you. Thank you.
Okay. You also say that, and you already mentioned it a few times, the blanket guarantee was a major factor contributing to triggering the need for assistance from the Troika. Was this understood in the Commission when the guarantee was put in place? Once the guarantee came in and that measure being put in place, did you understand that what this was going to mean 2 years from then?
The logic and the let's say the underpinning of and the rationality of a blanket guarantee was based on the fact that one would consider the problems of the banking system being only a liquidity issue. If you have a liquidity issue purely, then you can do that. Then it's about volatility that can be overcome very quickly. And this is then you can do that. You put the big bazooka guaranteeing everybody. Liquidity then is restored, and the system continues as it was before. What was, I think, what became clear very quickly is that considering the interactions between the growth model of Ireland, based largely on housing growth and the boom and bubble that at the time, and the heavy reliance of banks in their portfolio on mortgages, it was clear that the bust there gave rise not only to a temporary problem of liquidity, but it was an issue of solvency. So the banks had to be restructured, and from that viewpoint, the blanket guarantee clearly did not help.
Okay, so at what point did the Commission see this problem for Ireland in terms of the bank difficulties being intertwined with the sovereign difficulties? Because you note as well the 5 fiscal corrections and consolidations that the Irish government had to undertake, from the moment of the guarantee. So at what point are you sitting in the Commission going, correction number 3, there's a problem here that's a bit deeper that these little bites of the cherry isn't going to address. We need to look at something bigger.
I cannot tell you I cannot pinpoint the exact time. I think in the course of 2009, it became increasingly clear that there was a more fundamental issue with the Irish banking system, and then leading into the discussion in the course of 2010 and the program, that was evident that one of the pillars of the adjustment program already in the recovery plan by the Irish government itself was, let's say, fixing the banking system.
Okay, so when Greece entered into difficulties and was seeking a program, were there any contacts between the IMF and the Commission in relation to who might be next for a program? Did they come to you and say, look, we think there might be a problem with Ireland? We're talking April, May 2010.
I cannot myself personally recall this, but I do not exclude it. I mean, we were at the time, just to get you the picture, into, as I defined before, as a life-threatening situation in which the vulnerabilities of a number of countries came to the fore very quickly. So when the focus was on Greece, I am pretty sure that the discussions went on at the time also on other potentially vulnerable countries, Ireland being one of them.
About the proximity of the Commission to the ECB when it came to addressing the Irish situation. I mean, you said to Deputy McGrath that later on in the negotiations, the ECB was channeling the view of the Commission. But prior to any kind of formal negotiations, how close are the ECB and the Commission in terms of their view of Ireland and their contacts, their cooperation in addressing the Irish case?
Obviously, very, very close. I mean, we are working in the Eurogroup, in the Euro working group where I'm myself represented. We have teams. We work at an operational level in an extremely close manner, and I think we have in this. We may have a difference of view compared to the IMF. We embodied in our reasoning very strongly the risk of contagion that were present at the time. Now, on the risks of contagion, Ireland was, let's say, a quintessential candidate because of the size of the banking system and because of the interplay between the Irish banking system and that of the rest of the EU. This was much more the case of, let's say, the initial programs that we had for non-euro area countries, much more the case than Greece, where contagion was more related to, let's say, imitation effects and risks of, in a domino effect. For Ireland, there was a clear interplay between the Irish system and the rest of the EU, also with the US. So these elements of risk or spillovers, I think, were very present and rightly so.
Okay, well, I'm talking about the relationship between the ECB and the Commission in addressing Ireland. So we have it in evidence from Mr. Cardiff that in September, when the ECB became aware of the funding cliff, the bank funding cliff, that the President of the ECB phoned the Department of Finance and spoke to the Minister and demanded that the Commission be allowed to go to Ireland to see what was happening and what we were doing ahead of this challenge. So would that be unusual for the ECB to be making those kinds of requests or demands for the Commission to do work?
I think I'm not particularly aware in particular of this episode directly. I've read it myself, as you have done. I think it is. I don't see that as unprecedented or particularly problematic. I think the ECB has, let's say, its own responsibilities in this. It is worried about the state of the financial system and more generally of for its implication for monetary policy, and the ECB is also fully aware that a number of other elements on the fiscal, on the structural side affect this. So I don't think it is particularly problematic that there will be a suggestion of that sort.
So a team did come from the Commission in September of 2010. And it's been characterised by Mr. Cardiff that the purpose of that mission was to make an initial precautionary assessment of the potential for a bailout programme. Is that accurate?
In terms of contingency plan, it is accurate. That we did not negotiate at the time with the Irish authorities. We were not in a negotiating mode or mood. We, in terms of contingency planning at the time, I think it was only normal for a responsible institution to do so.
Okay. Well, could we characterise that then as the beginning of bailout discussions or contacts at a technical level?
I would think so, yeah.
Okay. And then we moved to later in September, Minister Lenihan has gone to Brussels for discussions with Olli Rehn. And Ollie Rehn communicated to the minister, this is according to Kevin Cardiff's evidence, that he thought Portugal would be next in line for a bailout, but that you told him that you thought Ireland would be next for a bailout. Do you recall that discussion?
I do not recall the specifics, but okay. I cannot deny that either.
Okay.
It may well be.
Okay, so but that was your thinking at the time, that Ireland would be, this is the end of September, that Ireland would be next for a bailout?
I think at the time, after having had the Greek program, with the mounting tensions and the rapid increase in the spreads on the Irish government bonds, I think it was not essentially myself, I think, but it was quite widespread view that should the crisis not abate by itself, it didn't look like it at the time, that Ireland could be a potential candidate for an assistance program.
Was it easier to manoeuvre Ireland into a bailout, given that they had withdrawn from the bond market?
Can you repeat again? Sorry.
Easier to manoeuvre Ireland into a bailout, given that they had withdrawn from the sovereign bond market?
No, I do not accept the characterization of us maneuvering Ireland into a program. I think there was an honest, fair, prudent assessment of the state of the situation of the Irish economy and the Irish financial system and the Irish public finances, and what was needed at the time. I think we supported very strongly the national recovery plan that the Irish government put in place and were elaborating at the time. I think we had our good advice on that, as always we do in a sharing sovereignty situation as we have in the EU, and that was but we did not maneuver, let's say, push or threaten anybody.
Was the Commission involved in the Deauville Declaration in October? In the Deauville Declaration for France and Germany?
We were not involved in the Deauville Declaration. It came a bit out of the blue from the Germany and France on the famous Deauville beach. And the assessment at the time was that whilst for some, let's say, political reasons, one could understand the Deauville Declaration in terms of, let's say, the contribution at the time to the financial stability of the euro area and the EU at large, was not the most helpful step.
But the Commission wasn't consulted before that declaration was made?
We were not consulted.
Okay. Can I move forward then to November and to the G20 summit? Was the Commission at the G20 summit?
Yes.
Were you at the G20 summit?
I was also there, yes.
Okay. We've heard in evidence of the frustrations from Irish members of the government that fellow member states, but also either ECB or Commission officials, were briefing against Ireland in Seoul. This precipitated the need, almost certainly, for a bailout. Does that sound? Are you aware of any briefings or conversations or discussions on Ireland at the G20 meeting?
Conversations, certainly.
Yeah.
We were, in the context of G20 G20 gatherings, where you have all the the top-level economic, let's say, intelligentsia and stakeholders in the world, there were certainly discussions on the state of the euro area, the state of individual countries, and I am pretty sure Ireland also. I do not recall, and I'm pretty sure that there were not, let's say, press briefings on the specific issue, as certainly not the way you may characterize it as something that is, let's say, messages which were against Ireland, the Irish government or the Irish authorities.
Did you share your view with people there that Ireland would need a bailout?
I do not recall exactly, but I am pretty sure that the issue came up, and the risks of the need of having to step up and to for Ireland to consider financial assistance. I'm pretty sure they were part of the conversation.
Okay, but you weren't party to any informal decisions that were made?
No, neither, and I am not aware of any side meetings, let's say, at the political level on the issue.
Thank you. I want to move forward then just to burden sharing and the legal advice. Did the Commission get its own legal advice on whether or not it was constitutional for Ireland to impose losses on senior bondholders?
I cannot tell about the specific legal advice sought at the time by the Commission. What I can tell you is what I indicated before, namely that the institutional system and the legal system at the time did not foresee this in any regulated manner, and that's why the risks involved in a unilateral decision on this were not to be disregarded. And as I indicated before, the potential litigation costs could have been very high for Ireland in particular, and more generally the uncertainty created for Ireland, the rest of the EU, not negligible.
Was it put to the Commission that Ireland might hold a referendum on the issue in case there was any constitutional uncertainty?
Can you repeat this?
Was it put to you that Ireland might hold a referendum to amend the Constitution so that it would be legal to burn senior bondholders?
I have no comment on this.
So that didn't come up in a discussion that you were party to?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Okay, thank you. And then if I might just move on then to March 2011, and the new government is in place. There are negotiations on the interest rate that's been agreed with the bailout programme and the possibility of reducing it. Was the Commission of the view as early as March 2011 that the interest rate needed to be reduced?
In terms of the margin to be reduced, no, I think we have been constantly throughout the discussion in favor of lessening the burden on the Irish government and the Irish people. So we have been constantly in favor of reducing and then eliminating the margin. So we have been and we have prepared the actual proposals for this. It is clear that one has to understand the logic of the institutional setting for the EU IMF assistance program. In these programs, we are largely in an intergovernmental setting. So we are not in the typical community, with the typical community method in which the Commission has the right of initiatives, put forward the proposal, and then the government votes, essentially a majority, or they adopt the committee. The Commission has in case of substantial changes, to withdraw the proposal. We were not in that setting. We are in an intergovernmental setting in which the Commission in particular was in charge of implementing the program. Clearly, we did not do that in a blind manner, and as I indicated and stressed, we were, let's say, behind the scene pushing for creating conditions and for the governments to consider reducing the margin.
My final question, Mr. Buti. We have it in evidence that in March of 2011, the new Irish government was in discussions with the Commission about reducing that interest rate, but that this had to come off the table because France and Germany raised again the issue of the Irish corporate tax rate. Is that what happened? Is that why those negotiations were postponed until later?
I cannot confirm this. What I can say is that I repeat what I have just indicated, namely that as far as the Commission is concerned, but here more in a persuasion mode, not as institutional responsibility, we were in favor of reducing the margin, and eventually we were extremely happy that it was decided eventually to not only reduce but also to eliminate them down the line.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.